Welcome to another episode of Books, Bullets, and Babies. I am your host, Dr. Sagashus Livingston. And as you may recall, this season we are answering the question, can the women we call infamous mothers become millionaires? Today we're going to look at that question, and we're going to look at it as it intersects with the isms, capitalism, sexism, and racism. Before we dive into that, there are a couple of things that I need to do. First thing I need to do is thank our sponsors. This episode is sponsored by American Families Institute for Corporate and Social Impact. The second thing I need to do is introduce our guest today. We are fortunate enough to have joining us Jessica Oladapo. Jessica and I go way, way back. Let me tell you how far Jessica and I go back. We go back so far that we were in grad school together in Chicago at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And I met her through a mutual friend who had gone to high school with Jessica. The funny thing about it, though, is when I met her, her last name was different. But it was the type of different that it was different, but it was familiar. It was familiar because it was my mama's last name. And you know why it was my mama's last name? Because Jessica's uncle was married to my mama. No, he wasn't. Yes, he was. Jessica's uncle was married to my mama. And so my brother and Jessica are cousins, which makes Jessica my cousin. And we found all of that in undergrad. As time went on, Jessica and I kept in touch, and we both started doing these very interesting things. And Jessica's one of those people. She's like one of my girl crushes. I am so inspired and so in awe by the work that she does, by the way that she parents, by the way that she lives in her authenticity. And I am really honored to have collaborated with her on a couple of things. She's in the infamous Mother's Coffee Table book. She has joined and worked with us on other, we've interviewed her for different conversations around entrepreneurship and business. And now we have her here today to talk with us about these isms. And so with that, I'm going to invite Jessica to come in and to talk to us about some of the interesting things that she's doing today.
Thank you. Yeah, I was gonna say not even undergrad. Not even grad school. That was undergrad. And that was way back when, 20 years ago. So thanks for having me on the show. I am in my current roles. I am a professor of sociology and psychology. And actually, interestingly enough, looking to leave that space. I'm looking to leave academia within the next year. A little bit afraid. There's some trepidation. I've been an academic for as long as I've, been, it seems. But really excited to focus on the business that I like to see as the rents that I pay to live on Earth. And so my business is called Diversity to Inclusion, Inc. And with Diversity to Inclusion, Inc., I provide professional development for all sorts of entities, schools, school districts, police departments, fire departments, whole entire cities, park districts, corporations, all sorts of different groups. Rely on my services. But not only have I been fortunate enough to develop these relationships where I can provide professional development, but also I've moved into the space of providing long-term consulting and coaching. So I coach school administrators as they assist, school administrators, park districts, all sorts of groups as they attempt to create spaces of belonging, because really that's what the conversation is about. How do we build better relationships, and ensure that the people who we have in our space truly feel as though they belong? After all, belonging is a basic human need. And so our interest should be in creating spaces of belonging, both in the workplace. I also think about it as it relates to how I parent. I hope that within my household, my children feel like they belong. And whoever I encounter just in Target, I hope that the cashier in Target also feels like they belong when they engage with me. And so that's really the work that I do overall.
I can say that whenever I encounter and have a conversation with you, you always make me feel as if I belong. So thank you for that. You're always so warm. You're always so kind. You're always so authentic. And you're an amazing and present listener. So you make me feel belonged. With
Good.
that said, I'm going to dive into our first question. All right. So you've given us kind of this general overview of what you do. Can you give us an idea of what you do? Give us an idea of what your typical work day or work week looks like.
Oof. My typical work day, I can usually be found right here in this space, or in my office in my basement, um, working on new projects, or not new projects, but working on projects. So creating things for clients. Actually, this week I'm creating for clients a year-long plan. So, how do we create spaces of belonging, but by actually developing a plan, a continual plan, so that we can talk about belonging and talk about challenges to belonging, including things like bias, and then talk about the intersections of identity, which is actually one of my favorite things to talk about. That intersectionality, that one cannot understand the perspective of one individual simply by looking at one component of their identity. And so for me, I am Black, I am a woman, I am a mother, I am a partner, I am mostly heterosexual, I am all of these things, and all of these things create my identity. And so that's one of the things that I'm working on right now, developing, creating short videos to explain intersectionality, which I am thrilled with. And so my typical work week looks just like that, especially during the summer. When the semester starts, and here's why I am looking to leave academia. Actually, is that my business has grown so much that my 9 to 5 has kind of taken the back. Um, so so when the semester starts, I'll be back on campus next week, actually, also teaching, which is also really thrilling. Like I really, really love and enjoy teaching. However, the work that I do for myself, and engaging in these conversations is even more thrilling at this moment. And so starting next week, it'll be my business plus teaching. Um, and it also looks like creating and coaching, but then there are some weeks where I have, 13 sessions in a week. So back to back sessions in a day. Um, this week I don't have any sessions. So this week is just planning and coaching, which is kind of a reprieve,
Yes.
but it's busy,
Yes.
busy all the time.
That I can understand. So, one of the reasons why I am very excited about you being a guest is because this season we are looking at this question: can the women we call infamous mothers become millionaires? And we can't ask that question without looking at its intersection with capitalism. And when I think about capitalism and discussions, who would I want to have a conversation about capitalism with? You are the first person who comes to mind. And so, with that, I am hoping that you can kind of, first of all, just talk to us about what is capitalism and why should we be thinking about it as we delve into this discussion about building wealth.
Yeah. So, from a very sociological perspective, which of course is the way that I see the world, right? from a very sociological perspective, capitalism is the economic system that is in the interest of maximum profit. So capitalism demands profit. As capitalism demands profit, capitalism also demands exploitation because one cannot have profit without, according to Marx, what happens in capitalism is that groups that gain power create organizations, create structures in their interest. As such, they are attempting to get as much as they can from the workers. And that's a very short definition. I have this whole like 60-minute lecture on that alone. But it is in the interest of profit. In order to have profit, I have to get as much work as I can from the people who are working for me, right? Which is, by definition, exploitation. In other words, the definition of capitalism has embedded within it exploitation. In fact, Marx suggests that capitalism has its roots in its own destruction because of that, because capitalism demands exploitation, and eventually the people who are exploited are going to be fed up. And so that's a really short, simplistic definition of capitalism. In other words, capitalism is an economic system in the interest, created in the interest of profit, which leads to exploitation and monopolies and oligopolies, which is harmful to the majority of society, especially people who already experience marginalization. So then when we think about how does capitalism impact particular groups, what we know is that people of color, particularly Black folk in the US, have always been exploited because of capitalism. Women have always been exploited because of capitalism. And so, again, the really simplistic way of explaining capitalism. So, there's a really great book called um, it's about enslavement and how capitalism or enslavement led to the capitalism that we benefit from today. But I'm going to look up the name of the book in a second.
Okay. All right. So, why should we be thinking about capitalism as we talk about building wealth?
We should definitely be thinking about it so that we are not actually engaging in systems of oppression that exploits people who look like us. I personally do not, because I know this, I do not want to be in the practice of engaging in practices that are harmful to people who look like me,
Yes.
right? Especially as there are better ways of ensuring and building wealth collectively. The problem, of course, is that we exist within a capitalist system. I completely recognize the ways that I benefit as someone who is squarely in the middle class, as someone who is an academic, as someone who is a homeowner, as someone who is a business owner. I completely recognize that I benefit from capitalist practices. However, that recognition also makes me more accountable to ensure that I am not continuing to engage in the exploitive components, the exploitive aspect of capitalism.
Okay.
So it becomes kind of a catch-22.
So, speaking of that catch 22, is capitalism bad all the time? Why or why not?
Oh, I'm completely anti-capitalist.
Okay.
Um, I think capitalism personally, and I know that there are people who are like, well, there can be some ethical capitalism. And I'm like, absolutely not. If the definition of capitalism is in pursuits of maximum profit, which then requires exploitation, right? How is capitalism ever going to be beneficial to the marginalized groups if capitalism by itself demands exploitation. Because then the question becomes, well, what group is being exploited, right? And so there are people
Yes.
who will say, there's ethical capitalism, or my favorite, Black capitalists, right?
Okay.
The only reason why Black folks tend to see capitalism as bad is because we don't have Black capitalism. And so then my question is, well, then if we have Black capitalism, with air quotes, who's being exploited within Black capitalism? And the answer inevitably will be women and or immigrants who are Black or Hispanic or Asian, right? So there will always be someone who is being exploited because exploitation is a necessary part of capitalism.
Got it. Okay. So is conscious capitalism a thing? If so, what does that look like? And I think you've essentially answered that, but we know there's a book called Conscious Capitalism. And so I'm sure people will argue that no, there's a way that you can you can run businesses and corporations in a way that's ethical. And what I'm thinking you're going to say, based on what you've already said, is that yeah, there's a way that you can do things, but it won't be using a model that's rooted in capitalism.
Yeah, it can't, right? Um, there is collectivism,
Okay.
but then collectivism is not a component of capitalism, right? So then what we're asking people to do, we're asking people to be in pursuit of maximum profit while also using elements of things like socialism, and then calling it ethical capitalism. And yet there will be people who are still being exploited, right? There will still be people who are harmed. And so I think the question of ethical capitalism or conscious capitalism, again, is who are we willing to allow to be harmed?
Okay.
And far too frequently, that question is answered with, we are willing to allow women to be harmed, or we are willing to allow immigrants to be harmed, or we are willing to allow children to be harmed and families.
So, what is so can we become wealthy without becoming oppressors?
Ooh, and again, that's the catch 22, right? I think that we can be comfortable. I do not think, personally, this is completely my bias, I do not think that we can amass a great deal of wealth without stepping on somebody's neck. I don't
Okay.
think.
Okay.
Uh, I think that if we engage in, again, collectivism, and we are concerned with what is good for the group, and as we are concerned with what is good for the group, then what we attain will be kind of spread out. And one of the ways I think about this is my father used to laugh at me. I've got 4 kids, and the girls are all a year apart. And after I had my second daughter, for my first daughter's birthday, the oldest girl and the middle girl got a gift. Now, the oldest girl got like an additional gift, but there was a recognition that we're all celebrating each other in this household, right? That we are all a part of this household. We all benefit when we share. We all benefit when we recognize each other. My third daughter was born a year after my second daughter, and the trend continued, right? So everybody got something for everyone's birthdays. And what I found to be interesting is that people would say things like, and still do, oh, the girls are so close in age. What about that sibling rivalry? And for so long, I was like, sibling rivalry, we don't really deal with sibling rivalry in my household because they see each other as a member of this collective, right? That we're all a part of this team. Ain't no sibling rivalry, right? So there was not an attempt to, I have this, you have this, I have this, you have this. We're attempting to one up each other. Because again, going back to what I was saying earlier, it is my hope that I am always working in the interest of creating a space of belonging in every single individual. While I can recognize their individuality, I can also create a space where all of them belong. And that's really the way that I see even um, amassing wealth. How are we doing that together? Is there collectivism? Are we working in the interest of the entire group? Or are we working only in the interest of what I have and what I can pass down to my children?
Okay. So, in what ways? I really love the anecdote you just shared about your daughters, and that is a perfect example and a perfect way for us to think about what belonging can look like in our homes. When you are designing your business, how are you designing your business in a way that allows you to challenge capitalism in the way that you practice your business? So we understand that in content wise, you're challenging capitalism, but how are you in your day to day practices inside of your business? How are you challenging capitalism? And
Yeah,
we're really asking this question because we want to steal some of your ideas about building ethical businesses.
yeah. So of course, content wise, it's there, right? So that challenge. In terms of practices, currently I've got one employee, and whatever she does, she's gonna make, like, I'm gonna still pay her, right? So one of the really influential people who talks about belonging is John Powell, John A. Powell. John Powell says that we can create something called um, targeted universalism. And targeted universalism says that when we are creating spaces of belonging, that we pay attention to the goal rather than necessarily where people are, right? So if I'm paying attention to the goal, wherever people are, I am going to do everything in my power to get them to the goal. And so for my one employee, I'm like, whatever you need, I'm going to get you here. So if you did this amount of work this month, this amount of work the following month, less work, no work, I don't care. I'm still going to ensure that you get this, right? You get here. So that's one way. Like how do I treat and engage with my employees? I want to make sure that I'm not exploiting her in any way. What we also know from research is that when we engage in business practices in that way, making sure that people have what they need, that actually increases their productivity. So what I have found is that my cute little employee, he will send me random text messages. Hey, I'm not doing anything today. Do you need anything? Right? Because she knows I'm, I should be productive. And I don't like to shoot on people because whatever you do, I don't care. That's your business, right? But knows that she's going to get taken care of by me. And she knows that if she has a crisis, she can call me. So that's one way. Another way is that when I am working with clients, for many of my clients, if it's an all year, or if I have a contract that goes 12 months or 6 months, I will say, here's a flat rate. Now, however many hours you get, the flat rate is based on 10 hours a month. If you get 12 hours out of me for that month, it's still the same flat rate. If you get 8 hours from me for that month, it's still the same rate, right? That it eventually balances out. In my mind, what ends up happening, and what ends up happening in real life frequently, is that they end up, it balances out, but we end up developing a different sort of partnership, right? Because we know we're working in the interest of the betterment of the group, of the collective. And so I think I have an interesting relationship with money, where when I first started my business, I was like, I don't want to do this for money. Like, I want to do it because it's good for people. But what I also know is that within a capitalist system, if people don't put skin in the game, then they don't value it as much. That part of it kind of sucks. So again, I know that is true. And so then the way that I engage with my clients and the way that I engage with my employees is that what's most important isn't money. What's most important is the relationship building. And how are we building this relationship? And money is just a necessary component.
I really appreciate that response, in part because so much about the work that I do with infamous mothers is rooted in relationships and community. And so to kind of hear that being, and for me, it didn't come from having a background in sociology, or just kind of understanding a lot of the parameters of what it means to live in capitalism. It came from experiencing being the marginalized, right? So when you have to show up and be the mom with all of these children, with so much responsibility, with parents and community, and when you have very little dollars to make ends meet, while also having to be productive, I just didn't like the way that felt, and I understood how it impacted my ability to contribute to the collective. And so I wanted to model the relationships that had the most impact on my productivity, as well as on my ability to, the relationships that allowed me to have the most dignity. And so for me, so much about the way that I engage my contractors is about that dignity. It's about productivity, but in a way that inspires people to want to produce, because they feel as if they're contributing to a larger cause, right? It's not just for the dollar and the bottom line. And I work really hard to pay people well, right? So many times I've collaborated with women, and they will pitch their price to me, and I have a man pitching his price to me, and his price is often higher. And I will go back and tell the woman, I know you said you wanted this, but in all fairness, because I am paying another collaborator this amount and you all are doing comparable work, here is the pay that I would like to offer you. Tell me what you think, right? And you never know what a person's circumstances are. And so I don't just say, here, take this extra money, because there are all these other things that play into why people are making certain choices. But I say that to say, hearing what you have said is helpful for me, and I hope it will be helpful for our audience, because oftentimes it's not when we know better, we do better. We do better when we do better, right? So we experience the exploitation, we experience the struggle, but we don't often. And we find ourselves feeling bad because we know we are passing it on in our own practices. And that's often because we don't have examples of how to do things differently, right? We know what we're doing doesn't feel good, but we're like, I'm too busy. I don't have time. I don't have the knowledge to find another way. And so I
And the
am
other
thankful for that.
thing that as well,
Say it again.
so the other piece that we need to do is that there are people who will say, related to what you just said, I don't know a better way. There are people who will say, well, you're being taken advantage of, right? Or you're taking advantage of whatever. I am only being taken advantage of if my expectation of the outcome is only profit, right? If I'm doing this business for profit, then yeah, I can see how one would make the argument, make the claim, you're being taken advantage of. But if I'm doing this business, if I'm engaging in this business in the interest of building better relationships and assisting people with building better relationships, I'm actually not being taken advantage of. And also, what I have found is that my business grows when my focus is on relationship building and not on how many pennies I can get from somebody,
Yes.
right? But I have the impact of my business right now is I was talking to a client last week, and he said, I was at this meeting and your name just kept coming up. Like people just kept saying your name. And I'm like, it's something to be in a completely different city, 2 hours away, and there's a meeting happening, and my name is the name that continues to come up as people say, well, who are you having this conversation with?
Yes.
That's meaningful. Now, if I
Yes.
went into the business with like, nope, nope, I'm not doing it for less than 10,000,
Yes.
sure how often my name would come up in that. My name
Yes.
might come up, but then it might be, well, was it worth the 10,000 for you?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
What's happening right now instead is what sorts of conversations, what sorts of supports, what sorts of relationship building, what sorts of tools, what sorts of, have you heard her speak about belonging? Oh my God, right? So that's the conversation that is actually happening. And again, um, I gotta pay a mortgage and kids want to eat everything.
Yes.
I honestly wish that I can do this work without having to like pay people, without having to not pay people, but without having to.
No, I get that. I definitely get that. All right. So I have one last question for you in terms of, is there anything that we should have talked about today that we haven't? Or is there anything you'd like to add to this conversation that hasn't been added so far?
Let me look up this book real quick.
Okay.
Called
And you could take your
um,
time because she will edit out the lapse.
okay. This book is called Slavery's Capitalism by Sven Beckert. Sven Beckert. Beckert. And Sven Beckert talks about the relationship between capitalism and racism from the start of the US. And so he talks about it from that standpoint. There's another book as well called, I have so many book recommendations. There's another book called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. Brilliant. But also another book that speaks to the relationship between capitalism and marginalized groups within the US. Or not within the US, but globally, actually, in
Yes.
Africa, how Europe literally underdeveloped Africa because of and through the means of capitalism. So those two books, I think, kind of lay some groundwork for this conversation. Um, and then the final book, The Half Has Never Been Told by Edward Baptist, Baptist as in the denomination Baptist. Another book that really does a great job of explaining the relationship between economic systems and racism. That capitalism depends on racism. Um, Ibram X. Kendi also sort of explains this as he talks about the impact of capitalism on racism again and vice versa. So there's so much out there about that relationship. Ibram X. Kendi also talks about if we are going to be anti-racist, then we also have to be anti-sexist, right? That there's a real relationship between racism and sexism, and in both, they depend on, or with both, they depend on capitalism. So racism and sexism are maintained through capitalism and vice versa. So there's such a cyclical relationship that I believe, again, completely my bias, if we are working in the interest of getting rid of the isms, then we also have to be working in the interest of doing something different with our economic systems. For me, that looks like being anti-capitalist.
Okay. Thank you for bringing it all back together, because we said this episode was about isms, and I love how you made it clear that capitalism, racism, sexism, they're all intertwined. And it's important that we understand that fighting one means that we have to consciously be addressing all of them, right? So it's not we're picking and choosing. Even so, because often we pick the one that either most affects us or the one we're most comfortable addressing. And you're saying, no, we have to address all three, even when it's uncomfortable.
Or what'll end up happening is what we're saying is, and I actually just had this conversation with someone recently about, we should be paying attention to racism and not sexism. And I was like, I don't get that opportunity in my life, right?
Yes.
Like, I don't get to say I'm gonna fight racism and disregard sexism because I am a Black woman, right?
Yes.
And so if I am saying I'm willing to fight racism but not sexism, then what I am actually saying is I am willing to do the thing that removes the oppressive constraints from me, but I'm okay with the oppressive constraints on you,
Yes.
right? And so then you aren't really concerned with getting rid of any of the isms, because if you're saying let's get rid of racism, and there are half of the population of people who are people of color are also marginalized because of sexism,
Yes.
then you aren't really doing anything. You're just freeing half of the people,
Yes.
freeing half of the people. And you're not even really freeing half of the people because there are people in relationship. So if one person is in bondage in relationship with someone else who is free, then both people are in bondage. So
Yes. I have so much going in my head about this. I'm thinking about Hotel Rwanda, when you have the Hutus and the, what was it? Hutus and the, I can't think of the other group, but there was a couple that was married, and one was from the group that was being slaughtered, and the other one wasn't, right? And so, how do you negotiate this? But also, I'm thinking about Frederick Douglass's book when he talks about how slavery corrupts the slave master as much as it corrupts the person that's living enslaved, right? And so you cannot have these oppressive systems even if you are in the role of the oppressor, at some point this system corrupts you as well, right?
Yes.
It has an impact on a negative impact on your life. So in one way you might be receiving maximum profit, but in these other ways you're suffering, even if you're not aware of it at the time.
Which is related to what I said earlier about, when I have these conversations and people will say, well, yeah, but you're being taken advantage of. We only see ourselves as being taken advantage of when we are tied to a system that is oppressive.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
so I don't see myself as being taken advantage of because I am not married to capitalism.
Yes.
Right? I am actually working in the interest of upending that. Right? Like let's flip that on its head and say, no, I'm not being taken advantage of because do people feel as though they belong? Cool. Then my business actually grows.
Yes.
Right? Like I actually benefit from that model of flipping it on its head. And so, I think being able to even remove the barriers of how we think about, how we talk about business models and what are we actually working in the interest of is an important conversation to have. Are we working in the interest of maximum profit? Then cool, keep doing what you're doing, but please also acknowledge that if you do that, that you are also exploiting somebody just
Yes. Okay. Well, I definitely thank you, Jessica. You've given me a lot to think about, and I'm hoping that you're giving our readers a lot to think about. And one of the takeaways I have from this conversation is that when we are designing our businesses and when we're on our journeys towards wealth, the question that we should all, or the question we might want to all consider is, what are we working in the interest of, right? And so in your case, belonging is important, right? And relationships are important. All of us might want to consider asking ourselves, what are the things, the higher purposes, the higher callings, the higher impact, the impact we're trying to make, and how do we design our businesses in ways that allows us to accomplish that end, right? And so that allows us to not use dollars as our sole barometer for success. We have these other measures. And maybe that is one step that we might be able to pursue as we're designing and as we're walking on this journey. All right, I like that takeaway. So we have, we have to do our books, bullets, and babies card game. Every guest does it. And the way this works is I have this die in my hand. I roll it when you tell me to let it go. And then depending on where it lands, that's the card that we pull from. That's the deck we pull from. So you let me know when you're ready.
Ready.
Ready? PC. So this fell on PC, which is interesting because of who we're talking to. And so PC in this case doesn't stand for politically correct. It stands for player's choice. So you can pull from the books deck, bullets, or babies. Remember, the bullets deck is the wild card. So anything may come up in this deck. Books is our knowledge deck, and babies is our deck about mothering.
Ooh, let's do baby.
All right. Let's see. Ooh, this is a question. What have your children taught you about yourself?
Ooh. I tell people all the time that I'm a atheist agnostic, right? But grew up in the church. And so I tell people all the time that when the good Lord was designing me, that I was standing in the patient's line And I was like, this line is way too long. I ain't standing in this line no more. And I went and got a second helping of charm. So I got double the charm and zero the patience.
Mm-hmm.
Having children has forced me constantly to go get back in that patience line.
Yes.
Especially having children who are neurodiverse. So one of my children has an anxiety disorder. Another one of my children has major depressive disorder. And so, you know, it's forced me to like go get in that line a couple times. You got double the charm, but I got like half a helping of patience.
I love that. All right. So we're going to wrap up this episode and then I have to ask you that question. All right. And so, all right, you all, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Books, Bullets, and Babies. Our guest today has been Jessica Oladapo, and I am hoping that we can follow you somewhere on somebody's social media.
Yeah. So I'm on Twitter, but I don't know how to use Twitter. So don't follow me on Twitter. I am on Instagram, diversity the number 2 inclusion on Instagram. On Facebook, diversity 2 inclusion, the number 2 inclusion, comma Inc. On Facebook, and then my website is diversity2inclusion.org.
Thank you, Jessica. Did you know that before she became the poet and author that the world recognizes, Maya Angelou had spent a period of her life as both a prostitute and a madam? We know this because she wrote about it. She told us it was part of her life. It was a part of her life that she didn't hide or deny or appear to be ashamed of. Aya De Leon, a writer and lecturer at the University of California, Berkeley, points out that that was, in fact, a rough period in Angelou's life. De Leon adds to her statement by also saying this about Angelou. But she really modeled holding in authority all the things she experienced in her life and speaking about them as part of what made a rich, powerful, and interesting life filled with transformation. As we think about the legacy of Dr. Angelou, and as we think about her own transformation, the question I'm posing to you today is, what's your transformation story? What parts are you choosing to hide, and what parts are you willing to share? That, you all, is another disrespectful tidbit.